Hello everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. Last video I published, I tried recording at night and I think it's pretty safe to say that recording at night doesn't quite work with the current setup that I have. I need to look into a better lighting setup for a nighttime recording. So for now, I'm just going to be recording during the day because I think it just works better. So looking back at the 3 episodes of The Breakdown I've done so far, I've done 1 episode focusing on the work that I did on a film, and then I did 2 episodes focusing on other people's work. For this episode, I wanted to go back to work that I did. I thought I could make this episode geared more towards people who are maybe newer to the animation industry or getting into specifically the technical side of animation. I thought it'd be a cool idea to look at where I started and look at some of my very first models and not necessarily be overly critical of them and completely bash them for being bad and everything, because I don't think that's productive, but rather look at them with a more experienced eye and trying to figure out what are things that I notice looking at it that are things that I could have potentially done better or that I could do better now that I have the knowledge that I do, and hopefully this is knowledge that you can then learn about and apply to your own models if you're just starting out with modeling and things like that. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into the breakdown. So before we jump into actually looking at the models and breaking them down, I want to give you a little bit of a context of what those models are. So if you watched the keyframe episode about my journey to animation, you may have heard me talking about a class that I took junior year of high school that is basically the class that I attribute to being the reason that I actually ended up going into animation. The class that convinced me to go into animation. So basically the 5 models that we're looking at today are models that I did in the first half of that class. So here are the 5 models we're going to be taking a look at. We're going to look at them in a chronological order. The first project that I worked on and my very first model that I ever made is actually the Snowman model. I like the kind of iceberg and snow textures. What I will say is that those textures were the blanket textures that were available in Cinema 4D when I learned the software. We didn't really learn how to really customize textures too crazy early on, so this is nothing like the type of textures I would make nowadays where I would go in and actually customize a normal map or have some imperfections. This is very much the base material you can get in Cinema 4D. It's a very basic model. You can see that it's just a cylinder for the hat that I just extruded and added a little bit of a rim. Looking at the hat, I can kind of see the faceting. To explain what faceting is, basically, let's take a cylinder for example. A cylinder will have a certain number of edges that will create the shape. When you don't smooth, the edges are very obvious, and you can see that you have like one edge. In order to counteract that, you have to apply a smooth to your object so that the edges kind of blend and it's much more of a smooth surface. You can see here that I didn't do that because you can very clearly see the faceting here, and you can also very clearly see it here. This is what happens when you don't smooth. Looking at everything else, the actual shape of the snowman is pretty simple. It's just some cylinders that I just stacked on top of one another, so nothing crazy modeling there. I think definitely something that I would go back and do now is add a bit more imperfection in the shape. So grabbing a couple of the edges or some of the vertices on the objects and just pulling those around to create a more uneven shape. Now, the buttons themselves, I think, are fine. If I remember correctly, I used booleans to make these, and booleans are very notorious for making your topology absolutely horrible. So probably if I was to make those buttons again, I would probably go about just extruding them out rather than having an actual boolean in there. But I mean, they look fine in the render. I think the topology wasn't great though, so that's definitely something that you would have to watch out for. The carrot, I think, was just a cylinder, and I just grabbed a couple of edges and just created the indents. Pretty simple, nothing super crazy there. These, I think, were just stock polygon shapes that I just used and I just pushed into the snowman and just slightly messed with to kind of create different looking shapes. And then the arms, I think I just extruded out a cylinder and I just played with the width of the cylinder and just here added an extrusion to create some kind of interest to the arm. Obviously, you can see that I didn't add an edge loop. You can see this little thing here basically means I didn't have an edge loop right here or even right here to have a sharp separation between this branch and this branch. The actual iceberg and icebergs in the distance, I think what I did in Cinema 4D is there's an actual shape you can add, which is I think called a landscape shape. I don't remember, it's been a really long time. There's a landscape shape that I remember using where you could create different mountain shapes and there were different parameters you can mess with. So I basically used a bunch of those to create the shapes in the background, and also I have like 4 or 5 of them just to create the island that the snowman is on. Overall, I think this was a okay first attempt. Lighting wise, it's a little bit flat. I did try to add a little bit of color in here, and I also used a physical sky for the background. There's definitely a lot of things I noticed about it that could be better, but I'm not upset. I think this was definitely a good effort. Let's jump to the second one, shall we? So basically for this project, we just had to create a chessboard with all the pieces that was themed around something. So I really wanted to make it themed around music. Texture-wise, again, you can see they're very base materials. Nothing really crazy. This is just a basic marble texture that I just changed the colors of. And then this is just a basic metallic golden texture. Basically, what I did for this, I wanted it to be music themed, so I did like disco balls. So those are what those are, the red and blue ones. These little characters, these are basically skeletons you can actually just import directly. They didn't have any controls, but they already had articulated pieces, so you can kind of move them around. Here, I think this was supposed to be like a speaker kind of thing, and I also have like the same kind of speaker design in the background. Lighting wise, I don't think I really knew much about lighting back then, so you can see the lighting is a little bit not the best or the most ideal. I think it's just very strong, and this big shadow just really bothers me, especially because I chose to make the wall darker. I think I would have probably picked a different color for the background, just because I think it blends a little bit too much, especially in the background here. So that's definitely something, is just watch out for your color choice. There's definitely some detail in here, but I would probably want to go and add more detail into each pieces and add a lot of imperfections into the surfaces. You can see there's not really any imperfections here. There's just a material. So this was a project where we had to make a tricycle that was themed around something. So being a huge race car fan, I wanted to make mine after a race car. I basically first modeled the tricycle and then modified it. So the first thing that I did to modify it is obviously the handlebars. Usually you'd kind of have the handlebars more like this, and then the handlebars more like here. And I wanted to actually shape the handlebars that way. I thought the shape looked a lot more like a racing wheel, so that's kind of why I went for that shape. The base tricycle looks pretty good. I think I would have probably added a bevel here if I knew about bevels back then. Beveling is just basically you add a slight indent to your edge just so that it's more smooth, especially when you smooth it. Most surfaces in real life will have a bevel. It's definitely a really easy way to add some realism to your pieces. I didn't know about bevels back then, so I didn't add one. The tire itself, I added a texture. So this is just a texture I found online that I added as a bump map. Create some indents on the wheel. I didn't actually model those. I'd probably go about it the same way now, but I'd probably make my own texture for this instead of finding one online. The texture is very not rough. I would definitely add some roughness and a little bit of imperfection, because there's no way you're gonna get a perfect reflection like this at this angle. So this would definitely be something I would improve. Looking at the rest of it, I think obviously this doesn't look great. If I was to go back, I'd probably want to make this entire thing one piece. So I'd probably model a little bit smarter so I don't have to necessarily connect two pieces here. Again, probably an edge loop here, because you can see that there's a little bit of a web thing. So probably want to edge loop so that there's a sharper transition. I would definitely want to add some imperfections, and I would probably slightly modify some of those pieces and add a little bit more detail. But I think as a base, this is pretty solid. Moving on to the fourth model, I love planes, and so I wanted to do something plane themed. First of all, I'm just gonna say this right away. The sun was literally just a sphere. Cinema 4D had a pre-made sun texture, so I just slapped it on there just for a light source. This right here, there's definitely a weird topology thing going on down here that's basically creating this weird, almost balloon latex-like thing here. But definitely add some imperfections. I think that's a common thing. This light tree actually looks pretty okay. I would probably want to add more imperfections so it's not as perfect. Looking at this part specifically, the main thing that stands out to me is this little piece here. You can see that it doesn't really feel organic and part of the actual fuselage. And I think that's because this is something I modeled individually from the fuselage, and you can see that because the stripes are going through it. So that's definitely something I would go back and change. I would want to actually incorporate this little element into the fuselage. What I would probably do is I would actually extrude a part of the fuselage out to here and then create the hole with an extrusion down the inside. That's probably how I would go about it. And then also I would probably have the stripes on the fuselage here and not on the inside, because realistically, why would you have paint on the inside of an engine air intake? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But hey, this was literally the 4th model I ever made, so you know, I didn't know this stuff back then. I actually really like the way I did the engines here. I think I just grabbed a couple Tauruses and just resized them to create a sort of plasma engine. The main thing that I would definitely fix is whatever this mess over here is, because that just didn't look very good. Probably add a little bit of a bevel here, or add a bit more interest, because this just feels like a cube that just got slapped on. I would probably make the glass darker, especially if I didn't model the interior, because you can kind of see the interior that doesn't have anything in there. Here I would definitely darken, because you can see where the wing is going into here, and you can see how really bad it looks. So I would try to hide that, either by having something block the view, or just make the glass darker so you can't see inside. Final model that we're going to look at today is this one. Now, if you've watched the movie Monster House, this may look very familiar, and there's a reason for that. This is supposed to be the house from Monster House. In the class for Halloween, my professor made us watch Monster House, and our assignment was to recreate the house from Monster House as closely as possible, while still adding a little bit of a personal touch. And what I wanted to do is add something that reminded someone who's seen the movie of the 3 main characters. I forget the names of the characters, so I apologize. But one of the characters, the main item that he's known for is the telescope in his room, so I modeled a telescope. The other character has a basketball that's pretty prominent in the film, so I did the basketball. The girl has a tray cart thingy, so I modeled that again. Now, the house. The house I think looks okay. It's really simple. I'd probably want to add a bit more dents and things like that if I was to really go ham. The main thing I would do is I would definitely want to teach my younger self about UVs, because the UVs are kind of bad on this one, because look at that. The wood grain is a bit all over the place. You have some very, very big wood grain and then some finer wood grain. It's just kind of all over the place, and I would definitely want to rearrange the UVs so that you don't have these weird big tiles and then smaller tiles and then slightly bigger tiles. And then the roof actually looks fine. I think it looks a little bit stretched. I think the chimney looks okay, but then this, I think the tiles would probably want to be a bit smaller. The trees are really bad. The trees are just really, really bad. Organic stuff is harder to do than hard surface stuff, I think, in general. But yeah, I think you can kind of see that the modeling wasn't great. I think the bottom part could work. I would definitely want to add a bit more branches to make it less repetitive, or add a bit more interest and difference for each one. These, you can see that the UVs are a bit weird, very stretched, the textures, and yeah, I would probably go about it a slightly different way if I was to make it now. I would maybe be more careful about the way I extrude things. I would also want to add a bit more bend into it, because you can see the branches are very straight. I would probably want to add a bit more of a cylindrical shape, and also probably want to have the branches kind of go up and down a little bit, or have a bit more curvature to them, because branches aren't going to be perfectly straight. They're going to have a little bit of curvature. That's just how nature likes to do things. One thing throughout all of these is I would definitely go back and want to make more custom lighting, because it just doesn't look the best. The fog looks cool, but I would definitely want to add a bit more to it. And these are the 5 model that I made in that class. Yeah, it's interesting looking back at them, for me at least, seeing how far I've come, because when I look at these models and what I can make now, it's like night and day for me. So there we go. That was my breakdown of the first few models that I made. Hopefully this was interesting, and hopefully you learned something. If you're just starting out modeling, I hope this was helpful. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe to the channel. We're continuing to grow the channel. It's been really great to have all the support that I've had on the channel. I'm really, really excited for the next few videos that are coming out. I've got some really exciting ideas in the works, so stick around and keep an eye on the channel so you don't miss those when they come out. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you all very soon.